Hello guys, my name is Adam Shadow, and this in front of me is the Ultimate Storage System version 6. This is basically my attempt at creating the best possible storage for the oldest technical survival server, Prototech. This, unlike many of the previous versions, has 8 shulker box displays per slice, which is pretty insane as in terms of density. This is over twice as dense as most storage halls. The reason for that is a shulker box display allows you to not just take out items individually, but also press this button and get multiple of the shulker boxes. To achieve this, I previously used just one of these displays, or 2 of them per slice, with 5 or 7 or however many modules that allowed me to refill the shulker boxes of various types, obviously depending on the button you press. This colored wool here indicates the individual item types, or basically indicator blocks as I like to refer to them. As you can see, this has some interesting features compared to traditional shulker box displays, because it doesn't have any comparator here. It does not detect if this box is empty or not, and this is because from testing we found out this is pretty much not worth it. The reason for that is rather simple, and that's because you usually see if the box is empty, and you can just press the button if you want a new one or want to keep it like that. It doesn't really make the system faster at giving you the boxes. In fact, it might even slow it down since the detection takes a while. And if you are fast at clicking and moving your mouse, you should be able to do it faster. And it also reduces the required surface area of these things, because here I would have to have a comparator in this position and for example one here. That would obviously not work. The same, for example, here I would need to use some sort of block underneath here. Then I can put the comparator on or somehow detect the signal through this and move pistons around, which would make this a lot more sizable and obviously laggy and whatever, complex, cheap, expensive, rather than this very cheap design. This obviously has also an advantage over the previous versions. This uses a lot shorter pipes. Even though you can see there are quite a few droppers here still, it's way less than the 50 or so block long pipes I used previously. Obviously it comes at the cost of density, since 8 is pretty much the maximum for this. I don't think it will be possible to create more than 8 per slice. Maybe in future versions with new mechanics, or maybe with some way to increase the player reach, it might be possible. Also, it's important to have the blocks right next to the shulker boxes, because otherwise people might confuse them. So like for example, having just these blocks here, 5 of them at the top and all of the buttons down here, it will get really messy and people will do mistakes and fail to get what they want. Don't be scared of this water. This is just here in case when the box gets broken here at the top, for example here or even here, it might sometimes land on top of this, or even when this one itself breaks. That's because when you power the dispenser in this sort of configuration, like here, at the same time as the piston, you will have a chance of the box landing on top of the newly placed box. Here it's not an issue because the piston is activated a lot earlier than the dropper, or dispenser rather, in this case. Everything else pretty much works as previously. We have these 2 pipes for the filters and one to clean out the trash, the items that are created by this, because these filters require you need to take out one item of each box and send it in one line and the box itself in the other. So, for example, let's say we take these two things. Here you would have the boxes going through this line and the items going through this line. Obviously in this case it's just filled with redstone because of my lag testing. And then you will simply fill up this dropper here. But many people who try to recreate this mess this part up. They don't add a clock here to activate the other droppers. So this would, if this clock would not be here, you would only really be able to have 9 boxes of capacity. Now we can use a lot more. The same goes for all 4 in one half slice. Obviously the other half is the same, except this. This is actually the only, let's say, imperfection of this. It's not perfectly symmetrical, but this is necessary so the block here, when it gets power, doesn't activate the opposing half slice. The way this works is rather simple. When the item comes into here, it gets to 19 items here with 4 of the filler items or filter items or however you want to call them. At that point, this redstone dust activates this piston, which when the piston starts moving, it basically immediately in the same take unlocks this hopper. Therefore, these two lines can be synchronous. That means the boxes are coming in at the exact time as the items, and the box lands here. Well, and obviously the trash item lands here. You don't need to activate this as often as the other lines, since you can, for example, wait. Since here you can fit 9 stacks of items, which is a lot more than the capacity of the actual boxes. So you can, for example, clean this, let's say, every week or so. For example, during the night when nobody is online. Then, obviously here we have also the same thing with the clock. Here it's a bit different. I'm almost everywhere using the 4 game tick repeaters. That's for safety, because it makes it slightly safer for unloading. It's still not safe, obviously, since we are moving observers, but it's rather easy to check. Like literally just look at it like this, and you can see if there is accidentally one extended that should not be extended when the storage is idle. So it's basically the same everywhere here. Here is the only case I don't use the 4 game tick pulse, but this thankfully is powered by this piston, so it still ends up sending the right length here and here. This layout is not actually my invention. This was something Binary, another fellow Prototech member, came up with when he was designing a obviously binary storage, where he used something like this. It was slightly different. It had some of these observers in different positions. Obviously these things here were also different. And it didn't use filters like I did. And when I saw it, I thought to myself, oh, this could be a really interesting way to change up this design process of the USS. So I modified it, basically. Modified it, it's not maybe exactly the right word. I basically rebuilt it to use these filters, and turned out to work really, really well. And the Prototech members even voted in a poll that this is actually something they like a lot more than the 10 items per slice from the USS 5 version. This is not fundamentally better than the USS 5 in any special way. The lag is pretty much the same, maybe even less, since there are less tile entities. So let's now talk about some of the reasons for these designs, because I never really get enough time in the videos to explain them, and mainly some myths that people still believe even though they have been proven many times that that's simply a problem. For example, a famous one is something Mr. Pala Pala said in one of his videos years ago. I don't know even how long it was ago, 3 or 4 years ago. He mentioned something that it's possible to load a box, or rather a chest, with half items and half boxes. Because he explained it as one of the advantages of a binary storage hall. This, yes, it is true, you can fill it, half items, half boxes, but you cannot use it after that. Because there is no way to detect if a player took out one stack of items or one box. Let me demonstrate it to you. Now let's fill it up. When the signal strength reaches a certain level, these two pistons will basically switch the input from currently items to boxes. As you can see, this is filling up. This is a really problematic myth for me. A lot of people believe this for some unknown reason, because someone said it on internet who, yes, Pala made really nice designs, but that doesn't mean everything he said is perfect and correct, and this is one of them. And I even managed to load one item more than I wanted to, but that doesn't really matter, right? Here we have it in this sort of configuration. Now, what happens, no matter how I lock or unlock these hoppers, I will still have to have one unlocked and one locked, or use any sort of refill method, any kind of it. This signal, because the signal here simply does not tell me if it decreases. If it decreased because I took out items or boxes, sorry, out of this chest. So let's just demonstrate. Of course, as you can see, this flipped around. Well, now let's do it the other way around. Let's switch these two. And now I take out a couple boxes, and as you can see, if I would just keep taking out the boxes, it will fill up with items or vice versa. So here you have the definitive proof that this does not work in a storage, or it's not sustainable. You can maybe fill the chest, but you can't keep it in this sort of configuration, no matter what you do. And here we have another issue. For some reason, people still believe that having one large chest with items and one with boxes of the same items is for some reason a really good idea. Yes, this can work if you want to only store a limited number of items. For example, if you are playing a faction server or a skyblock or whatever else you like to play, where you only want to store, let's say, 50 different items, this is great. This is amazing. You don't need to worry with like 90% of the things I have to worry about when building this huge thing. But if you want to store all of the items in the game, that's over 700 of them, or probably even over 800, depending on what version you are currently watching this in. It's simply unsustainable. The problem is you'll easily unload part of it. Even this thing is not perfect, that's why I'm not such a huge fan of it compared to the USS 5, that's why I call them rather similar. This is 125 blocks long. The USS, so it basically barely fits into 128 blocks, which is, if I am not mistaken, 8 chunks, which is kind of okay, since usually on servers you have view distances of 8 or more chunks, but it's still a problem. Like, just moving, let's say, like this away from the storage could be enough to not load the end of it, which doesn't sound so horrible, right? The problem is these lines will break. desynchronize, and for example, you could have a case where the item stops, but the signal keeps moving, so they even fill up, which is just a horrible thing to happen in a storage like this, because that immediately breaks it and causes all of the items that are currently being processed to be incorrectly processed, almost with 100% accuracy, or not processed at all, which is probably similarly bad if you have a cactus at the end, which we will probably have, or something else. With a chest hall of this sort of style, even currently the best ones are similar 8 double chests per slice. You can get it up to 10, maybe 12, but they start to get quite laggy since you will have a lot of unlocked hoppers there. If we have 8 chests, this would be 250 blocks long. That's barely under the limit of 16 chunks. I don't know of many servers that have 16 chunks with distance. Most of them have like 12, 14, something like that. 16 is rather rare, and it's still it's 6 blocks away from the edge. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's say I stand here. Just standing like this next to a storage, especially in future versions where you don't have easy loading of chunks, will break it. And that's just unacceptable. Obviously, I'm calculating this for 1000 different items, so we have some sort of reserve for future versions. This is the reason why I'm so concerned about density. And I'm using these box displays here, because they are half as wide for the same effect. Well, maybe not for the same, like you can't take out the boxes out of this so quickly as you can out of this. But usually you don't really care as much. You don't care if you take out 20 shulker boxes in 10 seconds or in a minute or something like that. Because you won't take out 20 shulker boxes of anything as often. It's even hard to get so many of one item. Usually only reserved to things like cobblestone or stone that are really fast to farm. For example, if you just think about it, a player in Minecraft can only use 72,000 times something per hour, right? Since you can only click either left mouse button or right mouse button once every tick, which is 20 times per second. That means just storing millions of shulker boxes, millions of items, and expecting players to just take them out and use them anytime and really often is just practically unfeasible. No matter how fast you click or how great you are at building something, you will just never use up so many slime blocks or redstone blocks or whatever blocks you are using for your builds. Even if you just fill up some huge space with them, it will still take ages. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about these myths that make it really hard to explain this storage to other people. Now let's explain some other advantages of this compared to maybe the previous versions or other storages. I'm quite proud of this because this doesn't need you to define some sort of priority for items, right? You can practically, obviously this will be in future versions, this will be note blocks, not fence gates. This is just something we'll have to be using, or maybe trapdoors. We'll have to be using in 1.12 in future versions. We can obviously use note blocks. You don't need to prioritize where you put the items. You can access all of these just as fast. As you can see, this nicely giving me the items. For those who haven't seen the previous video, this thing lags under 1 millisecond per tick, even fully loaded like this, which is really efficient. And since this makes it a lot more easier to set up than the USS 5 or even the previous versions, because you don't need to make a 800 item long list and assign a number to each of them, which I was trying to do with the previous storages and it took forever. And it was really hard to decide where to put some decorative items. Like, do I put colored glass before colored glass blocks or after them, right? So, yeah, it's kind of a dilemma, and people will tell you, no, I use this kind of decorative blocks more often than these ones, and other people will tell you the opposite. So this solves this huge issue, and because there are less tile entities than in most storages, in fact, like this is extremely efficient, like because people don't realize something like this, which is pretty much the dream scenario, right? You have one hopper and one chest, right? This is the least amount of tile, and it's maybe something like this also you could have, where you have something like this, one hopper and one dispenser. It's pretty much the least amount of tile, and that's still quite a bit, right? You know, interface, and you will obviously need a lot of them for splitters, mergers, and most importantly, something people still are not realizing. It's another one of those issues with what Pala said, but this time it's not Pala's fault, it's rather the fault of the people interpreting it. There is a way to encode the position of items, or rather assign a binary number to items using minecarts. And for some reason, people still believe that it's better than using these filters. That's not at all the truth. Because yes, you can make it less laggy, but it will be also a lot slower. And making something slower means you have to run the storage for longer, which is not a huge advantage at that point. Like, if you have to run the storage 10 times as long, but it lags twice as little, you are not winning anything. You are not making it any better. In fact, I would even argue you're making it much worse, since having to load the thing, the longer you have to load this thing, the more likely you are that it fails through unloading. For example, because someone crashes. Simple, right? Like, people's computers crash, the internet crash, even sometimes electricity fails. The other thing about this that I'm quite pleased of is that we are only using one transport line for two of them rather, but one for half slice for all of the broken boxes. This makes it so much more convenient to use. Other than designs I used previously, which had like, I don't know, 5 or 4 hopper lines, which I attempted to somehow put together. And yeah, hopper lines are much worse, because the reason why they were hoppers was because I had comparators on top of them, and you can't put comparators on top of water or ice. So that's kind of a huge issue there. Also, for those of you who think this is limited to droppers, that's obviously not the case. You can simply replace this thing with a bunch of hoppers like this, and either put droppers on top of them, that's also a possibility, or you can even lock them, which then you don't need the droppers and you save up on tile entities. This is something I have to do some research on, if it's even worth not locking, but putting droppers on top of hoppers ever, since basically you are increasing the length of the list of tile entities, which Mojang has programmed in such a really clever way that causes a lot of lag when you're moving blocks with pistons. You could even attempt to use ice, but not for this filter design. You would probably have to use a bit different filters, maybe make them a little bit larger, so you can fit the ice block somewhere. For those of you unaware why is it such a problem, that's because if you have a dropper, observer or something like that powering this dropper line, it allows me to not have to have redstone blocks and the droppers like this here. If I would try to use even different way to power it, for example, something like this, it it might be immediately an issue. As you can see, this would be triggered. So I have to basically use it like this, or use hoppers. If you want to use ice, you would somehow need to put the ice next to the hopper, which means you would need to lock it from below, which, as you can see, is a problem if you try to do it, because then you would simply power the dropper, and we don't want to do that. We want to trigger it with a clock so it pushes the items further. Or you would have to desynchronize the lines and maybe use redstone torches or something like that. The reason why you can't use something like this is very simple, because no matter how you would try to lock this hopper, you would always at least quasi power this dropper. That means this would be not possible to power this using a clock. It would immediately get stuck. Just to demonstrate, let me place something like the ice next to it, so it changes. Now put, say, something into it, and now when I update it, for example by placing this packed ice, or even just activating a dropper observer next to it, you will see it will fire, and now no matter how I power it again, it won't deactivate ever, because it still thinks it's powered by this redstone block here. So that's pretty much the reason why a lot of designs that people when they try to recreate this, fail. Is because they don't do it like this. I don't know why. I don't know why people haven't come up with this. That's kind of interesting for me. So yeah, that's probably everything for this storage. If you are interested in building this, I can do something like this for you. Now you can take a screenshot of this. Oh, okay. Now you can take a screenshot of this. I'm using half slabs wherever I can, basically, because they are technically speaking cheaper than full blocks. I will go over it and show you some of the rotations of these observers. So you can nicely see the arrows here. This should be fairly trivial to rebuild from this. I hope when you do this, you really know what you are doing. Because if you have no idea how this thing works, don't even bother, to be honest. I have videos on my channels with similar or maybe even better designs for small amounts of items, or small amounts of different items rather, which are definitely something you should prioritize building over this thing. This is also just an interface. This is not a bulk storage, or at least it's not designed to be a bulk storage. It's not also designed to have some sort of pre-sorting or anything. That has to be also everything done externally. I have, like I said, videos about that on my channel. And you also need to build a setup for the control of the items and boxes that they are sending through these lines. Because in some cases you might not need to have this running at full speed, and what you want to do also is to build pipes that curve around from here, from somewhere, for example, like this, to maybe not here, from this to maybe this, or from to the other side here somewhere, which is rather tricky to do. It's not impossible, obviously. It's rather quick if you know what you are doing, but you have to know it, right? So this is not something you should just see and immediately build on your world. You will most likely mess up something. It will not work for you, and then you will leave me comments explaining to me how I am somehow dumb and didn't make this right. So yeah, but please, let's avoid that issue and just build it if you really know what you are doing. So that's probably it. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe. It helps a lot, and to push these videos so more people know about this. And technical Minecraft is not just some sort of obscure activity people are doing.